What if the clearest warning about the return of Christ was never lost, but quietly removed? For centuries, the Ethiopian Bible has preserved something most of the Christian world no longer reads, the complete Book of Enoch. While councils argued and empires standardized, monks in the highlands copied, prayed, and protected a manuscript that may hold the missing context for the end of the age. And then, in the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls surfaced and changed everything. What if the text your pastor calls Apocrypha was the text Jesus' world considered essential? What if a first-century author quoted it word for word, and early believers expected you to recognize the reference? What if the book that explains why corruption multiplies, why creation groans, and why judgment must restore, not merely destroy, was sitting in plain sight all along? In this video, we follow the story the West forgot and Ethiopia never stopped telling. We'll see why Jude cites Enoch's prophecy, why Qumran scribes cherished it, and how Enoch's vision of the Son of Man illuminates Jesus' own language about glory, angels, and the final assize. We'll unpack a prophetic pattern, not dates, but signs, that reads like a diagnosis of our times: moral inversion, predatory wealth, ecological upheaval, and an information fog thick enough to choke truth itself. And we'll confront a bold claim from Enoch's astronomical book: if you measure sacred time with a corrupted clock, you will keep missing the appointed moments. Stay until the end, because I'm going to read the single passage that reframes the Second Coming and show how Ethiopia's guardianship preserved it intact. Along the way, I'll share a free digital guide, Why Did the Apostles Hide Jesus' Most Dangerous Words? A simple, sourced roadmap to think clearly in an age of noise. If this already unsettles you, good. Scripture often unsettles before it heals. Hit like so more people find this investigation, drop truth in the comments if you're ready to go deeper, and subscribe with the bell so you won't miss what's coming next. Now, let's return to the mountain monasteries where the warning remained, ink on parchment, waiting for a generation ready to listen.
What if the clearest prophecy about the return of Christ was removed, not lost to time, but deleted on purpose? For centuries, people have opened their Bibles believing they hold every sacred word needed for salvation. But what if the most detailed description of the Messiah's return, the very passage that early Christians once quoted as divine prophecy, was cut away? Not by accident, but by design. While the Western world debated which books were safe, a small community in the Ethiopian highlands quietly kept reading what others had decided you shouldn't see. This is the opening crack in a story buried for nearly 2,000 years. It begins not in Rome or Jerusalem, but on the rugged mountains of Africa, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserved a canon of 81 books compared to the 66 of most Western Bibles. Among those extra 15 lies a text early believers once considered prophetic, the Book of Enoch. Who was Enoch? Genesis tells us he walked with God and he was not, for God took him. According to the ancient manuscript that bears his name, Enoch was shown visions of heaven and the end of time itself, visions so precise that later church authorities feared they would reveal too much. Prophecies describing not just judgment in general, but how the Messiah would return, what signs would precede him, and what cosmic forces would be overthrown when that moment arrived. For centuries, the Western world forgot this book even existed. Many scholars assumed it was legend, until 1773, when a Scottish explorer named James Bruce arrived in Europe carrying 3 handwritten copies from Ethiopia. They were written in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language still used by Ethiopian priests today. For the first time, Western scholars could read an entire text that their own tradition had erased. But the revelation didn't end there. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave near the Dead Sea and cracked open history. Inside those jars were fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the earliest biblical manuscripts ever found. Among them lay pieces of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke. They dated to the 2nd century BCE, proving this was no medieval invention, but an authentic part of Jewish thought before Christ. Suddenly, everything changed. The text the West had dismissed as folklore was validated by archaeology. And what did scholars discover inside it? A prophecy that sounds hauntingly familiar. Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all. Those words appear again, word for word, in the New Testament in the Epistle of Jude 14:15. That means one of Christ's own apostles was quoting Enoch as scripture. The early church knew this book. They read it. They referenced it. But later, councils decided you didn't need to. So ask yourself, why would a text directly quoted in the Bible be removed from the Bible? Why preserve the words of Jude but cut the source he referenced? The answer may reveal not just a missing manuscript, but a missing mindset. A world once open to cosmic scale, now edited for safety. The Ethiopians never made that edit. While kingdoms rose and fell, while Europe fought over doctrines and translations, Ethiopian monks in remote monasteries copied the same lines on parchment, sang the same hymns, and read Enoch aloud as canonical truth. They believed this book was preserved for a reason, that its warning was meant for a future generation. Maybe that generation is ours. Because according to Enoch, his vision was not for his time, but for a generation yet to come. A generation that would see corruption rise, knowledge multiply, and the heavens themselves shaken. A generation that would need to remember what others had forgotten. Stay until the next section, because we're going to travel into that mountain world, Ethiopia, the guardian of 81 books, and see how isolation, devotion, and faith kept the forgotten prophecy alive when the rest of Christianity turned the page.
While empires argued over theology, the monks of Ethiopia simply kept reading. High in the rugged highlands of East Africa, clouds drift across mountains that have guarded secrets longer than any empire. In stone monasteries carved into cliffs, monks rise before dawn, chanting prayers in a language few outsiders can understand. Gaz, the tongue of their ancient scriptures. These are the guardians of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, one of the world's oldest surviving Christian traditions. Their Bible is not the same as yours. It contains 81 books, 15 more than the standard Western canon. Within those extra pages lie texts that early believers once treated as sacred. The Book of Enoch, Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, the Shepherd of Hermas. While Western Christianity narrowed its scripture, Ethiopia preserved the broader story, not as curiosity, but as worship. According to Ethiopian tradition, their church began in the 1st century, when the Ethiopian official, baptized by Philip in Acts 8, returned home to spread the gospel. By the 4th century, when Emperor Ezana made Christianity the state religion, Ethiopia already had a distinct Christian identity, one that blended Jewish heritage, apostolic teaching, and indigenous spiritual insight. But here's the remarkable part. Ethiopia's isolation became its protection. Separated by mountains and deserts from the power struggles of Rome and Constantinople, they never attended the councils that decided which books were in or out. When the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE began pruning the canon, Ethiopian Christians were already reading Enoch. They didn't stop. While bishops in Europe debated orthodoxy, Ethiopian scribes sat in candlelight, copying Enoch line by line on parchment made from goatskin. They believed this was not an optional text, but a divine revelation preserved for the faithful. They read it aloud in liturgy. Children learned its stories of angels in judgment. Priests wove its visions into sermons about moral order and cosmic justice. Their reasoning was simple. Enoch made sense of the Bible. It filled the gaps of Genesis, explaining the cryptic story of the sons of God and the Nephilim. It gave context to New Testament verses about fallen angels and final judgment. It spoke of righteousness vindicated and corruption overthrown, themes that resonated deeply in a land that has endured invasion, famine, and oppression, yet never surrendered its faith. For centuries, Western scholars dismissed this as local folklore. They said, the Ethiopians are reading myths. But when the Dead Sea Scrolls surfaced in 1947, those same scholars were forced to reconsider. The fragments from Qumran matched the Ethiopian text almost word for word. The so-called folklore turned out to be authentic scripture, preserved not by accident, but by design. Imagine that. The world's oldest continuous Christian community had kept safe a book that predated the Gospels, matched the earliest Jewish manuscripts, and held prophecies about the Messiah's return. A book others had called dangerous. And maybe it was dangerous, not because it was false, but because it was too clear, too explicit about the fall of angels, the corruption of rulers, and the ultimate accountability of the powerful. In a world where religion and empire became allies, such a message was uncomfortable. But in Ethiopia, where faith meant endurance, not privilege, those warnings made perfect sense. To this day, priests still open hand-copied manuscripts during service. The pages, darkened by centuries of incense smoke, carry verses that Western Christianity forgot. The chants echo the same words preserved since the 4th century. When asked why they never removed Enoch, Ethiopian theologians answer with disarming simplicity. Because it is scripture, period. Their conviction has outlasted kingdoms. It has survived Islamic conquests, colonial invasions, and ideological revolutions. The monks who refused to discard Enoch did not just preserve a text, they preserved a worldview, that divine truth cannot be voted on, and revelation does not need permission to exist. And now, as the world rediscovers what they never forgot, the Ethiopian church stands like a living time capsule, a reminder that sometimes isolation is providence in disguise. But the story doesn't stop here, because while the monks were preserving Enoch in the mountains, evidence buried beneath the sands of Judea was waiting to prove them right. Stay for the next section, where a shepherd's accidental discovery in 1947 shattered centuries of doubt and brought the Book of Enoch back into history's spotlight.
Sometimes history hides the truth in a cave and waits for a shepherd boy to throw a rock. It was 1947. A Bedouin shepherd wandered the cliffs of Qumran near the Dead Sea, searching for a lost goat. Bored and frustrated, he tossed a stone into a dark opening in the limestone wall. The sound that echoed back wasn't bleeding, it was shattering pottery. That echo cracked open 20 centuries of silence. Inside the cave lay clay jars filled with scrolls wrapped in linen. Those fragments, later known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, would become the most important archaeological discovery in biblical history. Among hundreds of manuscripts, Psalms, Isaiah, Genesis, scholars found something unexpected: multiple copies of the Book of Enoch. This single discovery forced scholars to rewrite what they thought they knew. Until that moment, many Western theologians had dismissed Enoch as a late medieval forgery, a curiosity unique to Ethiopia. But the scrolls from Qumran dated to the 2nd century BCE, more than 1,000 years older than any Ethiopian manuscript. Written in Aramaic, the everyday language of Jesus, they proved Enoch was part of mainstream Jewish theology long before Christianity was born. Dr. James Vanderkam, one of the leading Dead Sea Scrolls experts, confirmed that 11 different manuscripts of Enoch were found in those caves, more than many of books that actually made it into the Hebrew Bible. The Qumran community didn't just know Enoch, they copied it, studied it, and considered it sacred. In their worldview, Enoch wasn't apocrypha, It was revelation. Who were these people? Most scholars identify them as the Essenes, a strict Jewish sect that withdrew from Jerusalem's corruption to live lives of purity and study. They believed the temple leadership had become compromised, that spiritual truth had been polluted by politics. So they moved to the desert, building a hidden library to preserve what they saw as authentic scripture. Among those scrolls, the Book of Enoch. Their devotion mirrored the monks of Ethiopia, two distant communities separated by continents yet united by the same conviction: some truths are too sacred to abandon. While the Western Church argued over theology and empire, these two groups quietly guarded the same forbidden prophecy. The fragments from Qumran matched the Ethiopian version with astonishing precision, the same verses, the same phrasing, even the same cosmic imagery. This was no coincidence. It meant the Ethiopian Church had preserved the original tradition almost untouched. In a world where most ancient texts changed with every generation of copying, Enoch had remained nearly identical across 2 millennia. Archaeology doesn't lie. The scrolls in those jars had been sealed since before the birth of Christ. They weren't Ethiopian fabrications. They were Jewish scriptures, copied by hands that believed they carried divine authority. The discovery silenced skeptics who had mocked Ethiopia's canon. The lost book wasn't lost at all. It had been buried in stone and protected by providence. But the scrolls revealed more than authenticity. They revealed relevance. The Qumran community viewed history as a battle between light and darkness, angels and corruption, a theme that runs through Enoch. They read it as a map of the final age, a warning for the generation that would witness divine judgment. That worldview echoes eerily across time. It's the same warning the Ethiopian monks still read in their liturgies today. Think about the symmetry. In the Middle East, hidden in desert caves, ancient Jews safeguarded Enoch. In Africa, hidden in mountain monasteries, Ethiopian Christians did the same. 2 distant communities, separated by continents, yet united by the same conviction: some truths are too sacred to abandon. And that raises a question Western Christianity can no longer ignore. If God allowed this text to survive in 2 places across 2 millennia through persecution and obscurity, was it really meant to be forgotten? The evidence says no. The timing says something else. Maybe it was meant to be rediscovered now, in a generation ready or desperate to hear it again. But discovery is only the beginning, because what the scrolls confirmed wasn't just the book's age, it was its message. Inside these ancient lines lies a story of rebellion in heaven, corruption on earth, and judgment that reshapes creation itself. Genesis only gives a hint. Enoch gives the full report. In the next part, we open that report: the fall of the Watchers, the rise of the Nephilim, and why God decided to reset the world.
Genesis gives 4 verses. Enoch gives the file. The story begins before the flood, before Noah, before the first civilization ever dreamed of cities. Genesis 6 offers only a cryptic fragment. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. 4 verses, and then silence. No explanation, no aftermath. But open the Book of Enoch, and those 4 verses explode into a cosmic investigation. Enoch names them the Watchers, 200 powerful angels who descended to earth on Mount Hermon. Their leader, Semyaza, knew what they were about to do was forbidden, so he made the others swear an oath. Together they crossed the line between heaven and earth, taking human women as wives, and teaching humanity secrets never meant to be known. It wasn't just lust, it was rebellion through knowledge. Azazel taught men to forge weapons, blades, shields, instruments of war. Others taught enchantments, astrology, sorcery, and the art of seduction. They revealed heavenly mysteries, the hidden things of heaven, twisting divine wisdom into tools of power. The result was catastrophic. Their hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, became giants of immense strength and unrestrained appetite. The text describes them devouring animals, crops, and finally, human beings. Violence filled the earth. Creation itself became corrupted, its balance shattered by beings that were never supposed to exist. In Enoch's narrative, this is the real reason for the flood. Not because humanity was simply sinful, but because creation had been genetically and spiritually poisoned. The Watchers had contaminated life itself. God's judgment, then, wasn't random destruction. It was surgery, a divine reset to remove the infection. The Nephilim were destroyed, and the Watchers imprisoned beneath the earth in chains of darkness until the day of judgment. If that sounds familiar, it should. The New Testament echoes it. Jude writes, "The angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." Peter repeats the same imagery. "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness." Both apostles were quoting from Enoch, assuming their readers already knew the reference. For early believers, this wasn't myth, it was theology. Evil didn't originate with humans alone. It began with celestial rebellion. The flood wasn't punishment for bad behavior, it was a cosmic cleansing. And the world we live in now still bears the scars of that ancient war. According to Enoch, when the Nephilim died, their spirits became the disembodied entities we now call demons, restless, hungry, and hostile toward humanity. The imprisoned Watchers await final judgment. The pattern is clear. Heaven falls, earth follows, and humanity inherits the battlefield. No wonder later church authorities grew uneasy. A story where angels sin physically, where forbidden knowledge sparks civilization and corruption alike, where evil has an intelligent origin and an unfinished sentence of judgment. It was too much for a religion trying to define clean boundaries between the natural and the supernatural. Easier to bury the book than to face the implications. But Ethiopia never buried it. In mountain monasteries, the story of the Watchers is still read during the liturgical year, not as fantasy, but as warning. To them, Enoch's account explains why the world feels perpetually broken, why power corrupts, why deception thrives. It's not just human weakness, it's spiritual interference. And maybe that's why this book matters again now. Because Enoch doesn't just describe ancient corruption, it describes a pattern, a cycle where knowledge without wisdom leads to ruin, where divine order is replaced by chaos, and where humanity forgets who taught it the tools of destruction in the first place. Sound familiar? Every generation sees the pattern repeat. The names change, the technology evolves, but the spirit behind it remains the same. The Watchers teaching, the Nephilim rising, humanity believing it has mastered heaven's secrets. According to Enoch, that cycle ends only one way, with judgment.
Not fear-driven annihilation, but restoration, the world returning to the order it lost. In the next part, we'll see who brings that restoration, the mysterious figure Enoch saw seated on a throne of glory, the Son of Man, radiant before creation, coming with 10,000s of his holy ones. And we'll realize that the title Jesus used most often for himself wasn't a metaphor, it was a declaration.
Jesus used one title more than any other, Son of Man. But that phrase didn't begin in the Gospels. It began in Enoch. For centuries, preachers have called the phrase Son of Man a humble way of saying, I'm just human. But in the ancient world, everyone who heard Jesus say those words knew he was claiming something far greater. In the Book of Enoch, written long before Christ's birth, that title already existed, and it belonged not to a mortal, but to a radiant, pre-existent being who would sit on a throne of glory and judge both angels and men. Enoch's vision begins like a dream that tears open the sky. And there I saw one who had a head of days, and with him was another being whose countenance had the appearance of a man. This Son of Man, Enoch writes, was hidden in the presence of God before creation itself, chosen to reveal righteousness and execute judgment. When he appears, kings fall on their faces, mighty rulers tremble, the corrupt powers of heaven and earth are stripped of authority. Does that sound familiar? It should. Centuries later, Jesus stood before the high priest and said, "You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The priest tore his robes and shouted blasphemy, not because Jesus was being humble, but because he was identifying himself with the divine judge of Enoch and Daniel 7. John's Gospel echoes the same cosmic claim. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Revelation 19 completes the circle. Christ returning on a white horse, crowned with many crowns, judging the nations, followed by the armies of heaven. Every image mirrors Enoch's prophecy, line for line. Dr. Leslie Wall, a scholar of early Christian apocalyptic texts, writes that you can't understand Jesus' self-description without Enoch. The title Son of Man, she notes, was already loaded with divine authority, heavenly preexistence, and eschatological power. When Jesus used it, he wasn't inventing a metaphor. He was revealing his true identity in a language his audience already understood. Imagine what that meant to the first listeners. To oppressed people living under empire, the Son of Man meant that justice wasn't a myth. The same figure who once judged the watchers would judge the kings of earth. The one who witnessed the fall of angels would oversee the fall of tyrants. The story wasn't ending in despair. It was moving toward restoration. That's why early Christians loved the title and repeated it 81 times in the Gospels. It joined heaven's courtroom with earth's hope. When they heard the Son of Man will come in his glory, they weren't picturing a gentle teacher. They were picturing the enthroned judge of Enoch's vision, surrounded by 10,000 shining hosts. But over time, as the church sought political favor and philosophical respectability, that vision became uncomfortable. A cosmic judge who topples rulers and exposes corruption doesn't fit neatly beside kings and councils. So the background faded, and the phrase Son of Man was reduced to poetry. The danger of Enoch lay precisely in that lost context. It reminded believers that Christ's return is not only spiritual, it's cosmic, judicial, unstoppable. The Ethiopian church never lost that context. In their liturgy, Enoch's passages about the Chosen One are read alongside gospel readings. When they say the Son of Man, They see the same blazing figure Enoch saw, the one who existed before the world began, who will return to set it right. For them, the connection between Enoch and Jesus isn't controversial, it's obvious. And here's the hidden brilliance. By preserving Enoch, Ethiopia also preserved the emotional core of Christianity: expectation. The sense that faith looks forward, not backward, that history is headed toward a divine reckoning. When Western believers read Son of Man today, they hear humility. The Ethiopians hear thunder. If we restore Enoch's lens, the picture of Christ changes. The second coming is no longer an abstract hope, it's the final act of a story that began before Adam. The same judge who imprisoned the watchers returns to free creation itself. In the next part, we'll follow that thread into time itself, into Enoch's apocalypse of weeks, a prophetic timeline dividing human history into 10 epochs. And we'll ask the question that haunts scholars and believers alike: are we living in the final week?
Real prophecy isn't impressive when it's vague. What makes it terrifying and beautiful is when the pattern fits the present. Deep inside the Book of Enoch lies a section scholars call the Apocalypse of Weeks. It divides human history into 10 great weeks, each one marking an age of moral rise and collapse. Enoch is told to write it for a generation that will arise in the end. He doesn't give dates, he gives conditions. For 9 weeks, humanity builds and breaks, forgets and remembers. Then comes the 10th, the week of judgment and renewal, when the righteous are vindicated and creation itself is restored. Enoch never names centuries, yet his descriptions sound eerily specific. He writes of an age when truth will be overturned, when the powerful will twist justice for profit, when the earth will groan under human corruption. He warns that knowledge will multiply, but wisdom will vanish, that people will call evil good and good evil, and that violence will fill the land until even nature seems to revolt. Sound familiar? Modern readers call these coincidences. Ethiopian theologians call them confirmation, because to them, Enoch's 10th week doesn't describe a distant apocalypse. It reads like a mirror held up to our own time. Consider Enoch 94. Many will love gold and silver more than righteousness. They will oppress the poor, and the honest will become prey. Enoch 99 expands it. Merchants will use false measures. The rich will grow richer while others starve. And Enoch 100 adds a chilling note. The earth shall be changed, and confusion shall seize its inhabitants. Economic inequality, moral inversion, ecological upheaval, 3 threads woven together into one pattern. Not random disasters, but symptoms of a deeper disease, humanity severed from divine order. For 2 millennia, Ethiopian monks have studied these verses, reading them not as superstition, but as diagnosis. They teach that when all these signs converge, not 1 or 2, but all simultaneously, the final week has begun. Look around. Technology that promises enlightenment also spreads deception. Wealth that should liberate multiplies hunger. Knowledge expands, yet truth evaporates in noise. Even the earth itself, oceans, storms, seasons, behaves like a body out of rhythm. Enoch foresaw this confusion. He said there would come a time when written knowledge shall increase, but false teachers would twist it so that few shall discern the truth. Today we live in that flood of information. Facts are abundant. Clarity is extinct. But prophecy in Enoch is never hopeless. It's not about countdowns, it's about awareness. The text calls the wise to recognize patterns, not panic over timelines. The generation of awakening, as Ethiopian priests describe it, is marked by discernment, people who finally notice that the same signs appearing in the sky, the market, and the human heart are connected.
One Ethiopian monk put it simply, "When the sickness becomes global, the cure will also be global." That cure, he said, is not political, but spiritual, turning again toward the original order that Enoch saw restored in his vision of the Son of Man. The Western world tends to treat prophecy like prediction. When will it happen? But Enoch treats it like a mirror. What are you becoming? That's why the book was dangerous. It removes excuses. It doesn't let you wait for the end. It tells you to live as if judgment has already begun. Perhaps that's the secret Ethiopia never stopped believing. Prophecy isn't about fear of what's coming. It's about clarity, about what's already here. So where does that clarity lead? Straight into the fabric of time itself. Because Enoch not just described moral decay, he described how even the measurement of days and seasons was corrupted. He claimed that fallen beings altered humanity's calendar so that people would celebrate the wrong holy days, missing divine appointments entirely. If that's true, then recovering the right pattern of time is part of restoring the world to order. In the next part, we'll open Enoch's book of the heavenly luminaries, a revelation about the sun, the moon, and the calendar that guides sacred history, a cosmic timetable hidden in plain sight.
If you use the wrong calendar, you miss the appointment. Hidden within the Book of Enoch lies a passage that feels like science meeting prophecy. It's called the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries, 10 chapters describing the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars. To modernize, it reads like ancient astronomy, but to the scribes who copied it, this was sacred timekeeping, an instruction manual for understanding God's order in the cosmos. According to Enoch, humanity once followed a solar calendar of 364 days, divided into 4 perfect seasons of 91 days each. Every quarter began on the same day of the week, making the year symmetrical, unbroken. It was the rhythm of heaven mirrored on earth. Feast days fell precisely, sacred cycles aligned like gears in a clock built by divine design. Then, Enoch says, something went wrong. The Watchers, who corrupted humanity, also corrupted time. They introduced a false calendar, one built on shifting lunar cycles instead of stable solar order. That small distortion had enormous consequences. Using the wrong calendar meant worshiping on the wrong days, celebrating the wrong feasts, missing the appointed times when heaven and earth were meant to meet. In Enoch's world, time itself had been invaded. Fast forward 2,000 years. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, archaeologists found something astonishing. The community at Qumran, the same scribes who preserved Enoch, followed that exact 364 days solar calendar. They believed the Jerusalem priesthood had switched to the corrupted lunar system, just as Enoch warned. To them, this wasn't about astronomy, it was about obedience. Using the wrong calendar meant aligning with fallen powers. Dr. Rachel Elior of the Hebrew University calls this the War of Calendars, a silent battle over sacred order. One calendar represented divine precision, the other human compromise. The Essenes chose Enoch's system. So did the Ethiopians. To this day, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church still calculates its feasts and fasts using a calendar that preserves key elements of the ancient Enochic pattern. For most of the Christian world, this seems like trivia, but for Ethiopian theologians, it's spiritual warfare. Time, they say, is the first language God ever wrote. Distort it, and the rest of creation falls out of tune. If that idea feels mystical, remember how modern life treats time. Endless work weeks, artificial lights, seasons blurred by screens and schedules. We no longer move with creation, we move against it. Perhaps that's why Enoch's message sounds less superstitious and more prophetic, a call to realign with the heartbeat of heaven. The Book of Jubilees, also preserved only in Ethiopia, echoes Enoch's warning. The year will be out of order, and they will make the day of testimony impure. In other words, once humanity lost track of true time, even its worship would lose alignment. The festivals meant to draw heaven and earth together became disconnected like a clock running slightly fast, accurate enough to fool, off just enough to matter. For centuries, Western scholars laughed at this lost calendar, but modern astrophysics confirms the year's solar length at 365.24 days, just one day longer than Enoch's 364. Was that ancient system symbolic? Maybe, or maybe it reflected a time before corruption shifted the natural cycle itself. The text doesn't demand belief, it invites awe. It whispers that precision is sacred, that divine order runs deeper than we imagine. And here's the larger message. Enoch's calendar isn't about calculating dates for the end times. It's about remembering that prophecy, morality, and even astronomy are connected. The corruption of time was a symptom of the same rebellion that corrupted humanity. Restoring time, returning to divine order, is part of the world's healing. The Ethiopian church reads these passages every year. They don't treat them as speculation, they treat them as reminder. Holiness is rhythm. To walk with God, as Enoch did, is to move in step with the design of the Creator, not just morally, but cosmically. So maybe the point isn't to fix our watches, it's to fix our awareness. If the divine rhythm is returning, if hidden knowledge long buried is resurfacing, then maybe we are entering the moment Enoch foresaw, when lost truths would be restored for the generation of awakening. And that brings us to the final question. Now that the warnings are revealed and the order of heaven re-explained, what does Enoch demand of us now? In the final part, we'll bring it all together, the archaeology, the prophecy, and the purpose, and face the ultimate revelation of what the Book of Enoch really says about the return of Christ.
Every revelation ends with a question. Once you know the truth, what will you do with it? We've followed a trail buried beneath centuries of dust, from forgotten mountains in Ethiopia to shattered jars in the Judean desert. We've seen the book the world tried to erase, the prophecy the apostles still quoted, and the warnings written for a generation yet to come. If Enoch's vision was preserved for our time, then this moment is not curiosity, it's confrontation. Because Enoch doesn't end with theories, it ends with a verdict. He saw the Holy Great One, radiant beyond language, coming with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment on the earth. He saw mountains melting, the earth trembling, rulers falling silent. But this isn't destruction for destruction's sake. In the Ethiopian reading, judgment is restoration. The world isn't being ended, it's being reset to what it was meant to be before the Watchers twisted it. Enoch's final chapters describe three groups destined for accountability: the Watchers, the celestial rebels who corrupted creation; the kings and mighty, the human powers who aligned with them; the deceivers and complacent, those who saw truth but chose comfort. And then, three groups destined for vindication: the righteous, who held faith when it wasn't fashionable; the seekers, who pursued truth even when it challenged tradition; creation itself, groaning for release from corruption. In that vision, judgment and mercy are not opposites. They're the same movement, the cleansing of everything false so that what's real can finally breathe. The return of Christ, according to Enoch,
isn't random catastrophe. It's cosmic justice, long delayed but never denied. It's the day when suppressed truth becomes undeniable. This is why the Ethiopian church never stopped reading Enoch. For them, it's not a prophecy of fear, it's a promise of balance. They see in it the hope of every oppressed generation, that God remembers, that heaven keeps records, and that injustice expires on schedule. Maybe that's the real reason the book was silenced for so long, because prophecy that empowers the humble and threatens the powerful has always been dangerous. But now, with archaeology, translation, and technology uniting voices from desert caves to digital screens, that silence has broken. And so the question returns, the one Enoch left hanging in the air for the generation yet to come. If the hidden texts are being revealed, if the patterns are aligning, if the message that was once forbidden is now in your hands, what will you do with it? Will you treat it as entertainment or as an invitation? Because Enoch's call isn't about decoding dates or fearing signs. It's about aligning your life with the order that's coming back, righteousness, clarity, compassion, and courage in a world built on confusion. The ancient Ethiopians have been preparing for 2 millennia, not with predictions, but with perseverance. They didn't speculate about the end. They lived ready. Maybe that's what this generation needs to learn again. Not panic, but posture. Not escapism, but endurance. The prophecy is not a countdown, it's a compass. If you felt that the world has lost its rhythm, that truth has been buried under noise, maybe you're not paranoid. Maybe you're perceptive. Maybe you're part of the generation Enoch saw. And if you are, your awakening is your act of faith. So before you close this video, pause. Ask yourself whether you've been walking in alignment or drifting with distraction. The restoration Enoch described doesn't begin in heaven. It begins in you. Stay curious, stay discerning, stay awake. If you found this journey meaningful, hit like so more seekers can find it. Comment truth if you're ready to rediscover what the world forgot. Subscribe and turn on the bell icon because the next investigation will take us into another lost text, the Book of Jubilees, the companion to Enoch that reveals how time, prophecy, and redemption were always meant to connect. Until then, remember the final line of the Ethiopian liturgy for Enoch. The righteous shall shine forever, and the Lord of spirits shall dwell among them. That's not a metaphor. That's a promise.